A fateful encounter. Jane Carter stepped off the subway into the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, her heart racing as she navigated the throngs of people. The cacophony of city life surrounded her, horns blaring, people chatting, and the distant sound of construction. It was just another hectic morning, but for Jane, it felt particularly overwhelming. She glanced at her watch, feeling a pang of anxiety. She was already late for work, and the thought of facing her boss, Mr. Morgan, sent a shiver down her spine. "Mr. Morgan is going to kill me," she muttered under her breath, dodging a group of tourists snapping pictures. As she hurried down the street, she could feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing on her. She had been working as a junior marketing associate at McKinley Enterprises for just over a year, and while she loved the work, the pressure was mounting. The looming quarterly presentation was just days away, and she had a mountain of tasks still to complete. Pausing in front of the corner cafe, Jane weighed her options. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't had breakfast. "Fine," she decided, rushing inside. "Good morning, Linda." "The usual, please, and make it quick. I'm late." Linda, the elderly barista, smiled warmly, accustomed to Jane's frantic mornings. "Coming right up, dear." As Jane waited, she glanced at her reflection in the cafe's window, smoothing her hair and adjusting her blouse. She looked presentable enough, but the bags under her eyes told a different story. Late nights and early mornings had become her routine, all in pursuit of a promotion that felt just out of reach. "Here you go," Linda said, handing her the steaming cup. "And don't forget to eat something." "Thanks, Linda. You're a lifesaver," Jane replied, grabbing the coffee and darting out the door. The scalding cup warmed her hands as she walked briskly down the sidewalk, mentally rehearsing her excuse for Mr. Morgan. "Mr. Morgan, I'm sorry I'm late because—" "No, that's not right." "Maybe, Mr. Morgan, I apologize for my tardiness." She was deep in thought when a sudden commotion caught her attention. A man in his mid-30s, dressed in a crisp business suit, stumbled against a building, his face pale and unsteady. Concern prickled at Jane's senses. "Hey, sir, are you okay?" she called out, hurrying over. The man looked at her, confusion clouding his features. I don't know," he stammered, his eyes rolling back. Before she could react, he began to collapse. Jane barely managed to catch him, her adrenaline kicking in as she prevented his head from hitting the pavement. "Help! Someone call an ambulance," she shouted, her heart racing. People around her stopped and stared, their expressions a mix of shock and apathy. She felt her palms grow clammy as she fumbled for her phone. With trembling hands, she dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice crackled through the line. "There's a man on the street who's unconscious. Please send an ambulance." Jane's voice was urgent, her mind racing. "Stay with him. What's the address?" Jane looked around frantically, her mind struggling to focus. "We're at the corner of Michigan Avenue and 8th Street, in front of Mike's Cafe. An ambulance is on the way. Is he breathing?" She leaned in close to the man's mouth, holding her breath. "Yes, but it's weak and irregular." "Good. Check his pulse." Jane took his wrist, her fingers shaking as she felt for a pulse. "I think so, but it's faint." "You're doing great. Stay with him until help arrives." Jane held the man's hand tightly, her voice a whisper. "Please, hold on. Help is coming." Time felt like it slowed down as she kept her eyes on his pale face, praying for him to keep breathing. The crowd around her murmured but offered little assistance, their phones more a distraction than a help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and the ambulance arrived. Paramedics quickly leaped into action, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. "What happened?" one of them asked as he knelt beside the man. "He collapsed," Jane explained, her voice steadying as she relayed what she knew. "His pulse is weak." "Good call," the paramedic nodded. "Jim, get the defibrillator. Looks like a heart attack." They loaded the man onto a stretcher, their movements swift and confident. "Are you a relative?" one of the paramedics asked Jane. "No, just a passerby." "Can I come with you?" The paramedics exchanged looks before nodding. "All right, get in. We might need more information at the hospital." Jane climbed into the ambulance, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She was determined to help in any way she could. As the doors slammed shut and the vehicle lurched forward, she filled out paperwork in the cramped space, stating that she wasn't a relative. "You're very kind," a nurse remarked as she assessed the man's condition. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did." Jane shrugged, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "I couldn't just leave him there." Exhausted and shaken, Jane sank into a plastic chair in the hospital's waiting area, her heart still racing. She realized she was 3 hours late for work, and panic began to set in. She weighed her options: stay and ensure the man was okay, or risk losing her job. She bit her lip, considering the consequences of each decision. But as she waited, the nurse came over to her, a concerned expression on her face. "You did a brave thing today. This man is lucky to have someone like you looking out for him." Jane managed a small smile, feeling a flicker of pride amidst the anxiety. "Thank you. I just hope he'll be okay." Hours passed, and Jane's anxiety shifted to a dull ache in her stomach. She felt her phone buzz and pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw multiple missed calls and texts from her boss. "Oh no," she muttered, her fingers trembling as she read the messages. "Where are you? This is unacceptable." She knew she had to face Mr. Morgan, but the thought made her stomach turn. The possibility of losing her job loomed over her like a dark cloud. However, her concern for the man she had helped outweighed her fear. She had acted in a moment of crisis, and that meant something. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. "Are you Jane Carter?" he asked, scanning the waiting room. "Yes. How is he?" The doctor nodded, his expression serious but relieved. "He's stable now. We're monitoring him, but you saved his life. Without your quick actions, things could have been much worse." Jane felt a wave of relief wash over her, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the doctor walked away, Jane sat back in her chair, reflecting on the day's events. She had saved a man's life, but at what cost? The thought of losing her job hung over her like a storm cloud. But in that moment, she realized something profound. Life was unpredictable, and sometimes what seemed like a disaster could lead to unexpected outcomes. Little did she know, this encounter would change her life in ways she could never have anticipated. Consequences and choices. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation Jane found herself in. Seated in the hospital's waiting area, she stared blankly at the white walls adorned with motivational posters about hope and healing, feeling as if they were mocking her current dilemma. Each tick of the wall clock resonated in her mind, amplifying her anxiety about the confrontation awaiting her with Mr. Morgan. In the whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty, Jane reflected on the decision she had made earlier that day. What had started as a morning filled with mundane worries about deadlines and office politics had spiraled into a life-or-death scenario. She had saved a man's life, yet now, she was faced with the possibility of losing her job over being late. As she waited, her phone buzzed repeatedly, drawing her attention. The screen lit up with a barrage of missed calls and messages from her boss. "Where are you? This is unacceptable. You need to call me now." Her stomach twisted at the thought of facing Mr. Morgan's wrath. He was notorious for his short temper, especially when it came to tardiness. Yet, amidst her worry about work, Jane felt a twinge of resolve. She had made a choice to help someone in need, and that mattered more than any job. Just then, a nurse with a warm smile approached her, breaking through her anxious reverie. "Jane Carter." "Yes, that's me," Jane replied, her voice shaky. "I have an update on the man you helped," the nurse said, her tone brightening the somber atmosphere. "He's awake and asking for you. Would you like to see him?" Jane's heart leaped at the news, flooding her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Yes, of course." "Is he okay?" The nurse nodded. "He's stable and recovering well. He wants to thank you personally." Following the nurse down a long, fluorescent-lit corridor, Jane felt a wave of trepidation wash over her. Every step she took felt surreal, as if she were walking into a dream she couldn't quite grasp. The events of the day played in her mind like a movie reel, the image of the man collapsing still vivid. As they reached a small private room, the nurse paused at the door and knocked softly. "Mr. Davis, you have a visitor." The moment Jane stepped inside, she was greeted by the sight of the man who had been on the brink of death just hours earlier. He sat upright in a hospital bed, his disheveled hair tousled, but his pale face was now flushed with color. He wore a hospital gown, looking both vulnerable and relieved. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice still hoarse but filled with genuine gratitude. "I don't remember much, but I remember you." Jane's heart swelled at his words. "I'm just glad you're okay," she replied, a smile breaking through her anxiety. "What happened? Do you remember anything?" He shook his head slowly, as if trying to piece together fragmented memories. "Not really. One moment I was walking, and the next, everything went black. I don't know how I got here." "You collapsed on the street," Jane explained gently, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I saw you and called for help." "Thank you for that," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with sincerity. "Most people wouldn't have stopped. They would have just walked by." Jane felt a rush of emotion wash over her. "I couldn't just leave you there," she admitted. "I was scared for you." As they talked, Jane learned that his name was Thomas Davis, a project manager for a well-known consulting firm in the city. He had been out for a morning meeting when the incident occurred. The conversation flowed naturally, their shared experience creating an unexpected bond. "I owe you my life," he said earnestly, his expression softening. "If it weren't for you, I might not be here right now." "You really don't have to thank me," Jane replied, feeling a little shy under his intense gaze. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "Not everyone would have acted so quickly. You're a hero, Jane." At that moment, the weight of her anxiety about work felt trivial. Here she was, basking in the glow of gratitude from a man whose life she had saved. In the grand scheme of things, losing her job paled in comparison to the impact she had made. As their conversation continued, Jane discovered more about Thomas. He shared stories about his work, his struggles with balancing life and career, and his passion for hiking and photography. Jane found herself drawn to his enthusiasm, and for the first time that day, she felt a sense of connection. But the longer she stayed, the more the reality of her situation crept back into her thoughts. Jane's phone buzzed again, a stark reminder of her responsibilities. She glanced down to see another message from Mr. Morgan. "Call me now." Anxiety gripped her once more, and she reluctantly stood up, the smile on her face faltering. "I should probably get going," she said, hating the thought of leaving Thomas. "I need to call my boss." "Is everything okay?" Thomas asked, concern etching his features. "I'm just late for work," she admitted, feeling a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "I don't know how I'm going to explain this." He regarded her with a knowing look. "You saved a life today, Jane. If your boss can't understand that, maybe it's time to rethink where you work." His words struck a chord within her. She had poured herself into her job, but was it worth it if her humanity was overshadowed by corporate demands? "Thanks, Thomas," she replied, her voice steadier. "I'll think about it." Before she left, Thomas reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Promise me you'll come back and visit me. I'd love to hear more about you." "Of course," she smiled, feeling warmth blossom in her chest. "Get better soon, okay?" As Jane stepped out of the room, she felt lighter, as if the burden of her worries had shifted. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself to face Mr. Morgan. The hospital lobby was bustling with visitors and patients, the atmosphere filled with hope and healing. Jane paused for a moment, letting the noise wash over her before heading outside. The crisp Chicago air greeted her like a long-lost friend as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She quickly dialed Mr. Morgan's number, her stomach twisting in knots. "Jane, where have you been?" he answered, his voice laced with frustration. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan," she began, choosing her words carefully. "I had an emergency this morning. I helped a man who collapsed on the street." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and Jane held her breath, fearing the worst. "An emergency? Are you okay?" he asked, the edge in his tone softening slightly. "Yes, I'm fine. But I stayed with him until the paramedics arrived," she explained. "I didn't mean to be late, but he needed help." "I see," Mr. Morgan said, his voice now thoughtful. "That's commendable, Jane. I appreciate your dedication to helping others." Her heart raced at his unexpected response. "Thank you, sir," she replied, surprised. "I just did what I felt was right." "Just make sure this doesn't become a habit," he warned, but there was no malice in his tone. "We have deadlines to meet, and I rely on you to keep things running smoothly." "I understand," Jane said, a hint of relief flooding her. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." After hanging up, Jane felt a strange sense of empowerment. Mr. Morgan hadn't fired her or even threatened her job. Instead, he had recognized her actions, even if it was begrudgingly. As she walked back to the subway, her mind raced with possibilities. What if this experience led to something greater? What if it pushed her to rethink her career path altogether? Upon reaching her office, Jane was greeted by curious glances from her colleagues. The atmosphere was tense, but she squared her shoulders and headed to her desk, determined to refocus on her work. With her heart still racing from the morning's events, Jane poured herself into her tasks, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. She had faced a life-altering situation and emerged stronger, even if the future remained uncertain. As she settled into her routine, Jane couldn't shake the thought of Thomas Davis and the connection they had formed. She made a silent promise to herself. She would return to see him again. Little did she know that her simple act of kindness would set into motion a series of events that would not only change her life, but also redefine what success truly meant to her. The ripple effect. The following days unfolded in a blur, with Jane navigating the hectic pace of her work life while keeping Thomas Davis in her thoughts. Each day at McKinley Enterprises was filled with meetings, presentations, and the relentless pressure of deadlines. Yet, amidst the chaos, the memory of saving a life lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that there was more to life than just climbing the corporate ladder. Jane arrived at the office each morning with a renewed sense of purpose, though her surroundings felt different. The hum of the air conditioning and the incessant tapping of keyboards seemed to blend into a monotonous background noise. It was as if she were viewing her workplace through a new lens, one that made her question the meaning of success and fulfillment. During one particularly long meeting, where the team discussed quarterly projections and budget constraints, Jane's mind began to wander. She thought about Thomas lying in that hospital bed, recovering from his near-death experience. She recalled how alive he had seemed when he spoke about his passion for hiking and photography, contrasting sharply with the sterile environment of her office. As her colleagues droned on, Jane's heart raced with a yearning to break free from the suffocating confines of her cubicle. The sterile walls of the boardroom seemed to close in on her as she considered how, just a few days ago, she had been faced with a life-or-death situation. It made the pressure of her job seem trivial in comparison. The thought of taking risks or pursuing her own passions had become more alluring than ever. After the meeting, Jane made her way back to her desk, feeling unsettled yet invigorated. She opened her email and saw a message from Thomas, sent just hours after she left the hospital. Subject: Thank you. Dear Jane, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out and express my heartfelt gratitude once again for what you did for me. Your bravery and kindness made all the difference in my life. I'm recovering well, and I'd love to catch up sometime, perhaps over coffee. Best, Thomas. Jane's heart swelled as she read his message. It was as if he had reached out from that hospital room, pulling her back to the warmth of their brief yet meaningful connection. A smile spread across her face as she typed a quick response. Subject: Thank you. Hi, Thomas. I'm so glad to hear you're recovering. I'd love to grab coffee. Just let me know when you're free. Take care, Jane. She hit send, feeling a rush of excitement. The prospect of seeing Thomas again felt like a breath of fresh air. It was as if she were stepping away from the rigid confines of her corporate life and back into a world filled with possibilities. As the days turned into weeks, Jane and Thomas developed a routine. They met regularly for coffee at a cozy cafe near his workplace. Each meeting unfolded like a breath of fresh air, full of laughter, stories, and shared aspirations. Jane found herself recounting her life, her dreams of traveling, her desire to explore the world beyond spreadsheets and presentations. In return, Thomas shared tales of his adventures in the mountains and the photographs he had captured during his hikes, each image a story waiting to be told. With every conversation, Jane felt more inspired. Thomas had a passion for life that was contagious, and Jane began to realize how much she had stifled her own interests in the pursuit of career advancement. His stories reignited a spark within her, reminding her of the thrill of exploration and creativity. One rainy afternoon, while they sat in their favorite corner of the cafe, Thomas pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he had taken during his last hike in the Cascade Mountains. The image captured a breathtaking sunrise over misty peaks, bathed in warm golden light. "This was one of the best mornings of my life," he said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I woke up at dawn and hiked to this viewpoint. It felt like the world was waking up with me. Moments like this remind me of what's truly important." Jane gazed at the photo, feeling a pang of longing. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I can only imagine how peaceful it must have been." "You should come with me next time," he suggested, leaning forward. "I think you'd love it. Getting out of the city, connecting with nature, it's refreshing." The idea took root in Jane's mind, stirring something deep within her. She had always loved the outdoors, but had pushed those interests aside in favor of climbing the corporate ladder. The thought of hiking with Thomas was exciting and terrifying all at once. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she replied, feeling a mix of apprehension and thrill. "Trust me," Thomas urged, a warm smile on his face. "It will be an adventure. Plus, I promise not to let you fall off any cliffs." They both laughed, the tension easing. Jane's heart raced at the thought of stepping outside her comfort zone. Perhaps it was time to embrace change and rediscover the woman she used to be before she got lost in the grind of her job. Their coffee meetings became the highlight of her week. Jane started to bring up her passion for writing, something she hadn't pursued seriously since college. She would write short stories and poetry, filling her notebooks with ideas and characters, but it had been years since she had shared any of her work with anyone. One evening, after finishing a delicious cup of mocha, Jane decided to take a leap of faith. "Thomas," she began hesitantly, "I've always wanted to write a book. I even have a few drafts, but I've never had the courage to pursue it." Thomas looked at her intently, his expression encouraging. "Why not? What's holding you back?" "I guess I've always thought it wasn't practical," she admitted, feeling vulnerable. "I've focused so much on my career that I lost sight of what I really love." "Life is too short to play it safe," Thomas said firmly. "You've already done something extraordinary by saving my life. If you can do that, you can write your book. Pursue your dreams." Jane felt a wave of inspiration wash over her. For the first time in years, she considered the possibility of stepping away from her job to follow her passion. Over the following weeks, she spent her evenings immersed in her writing. She joined a local writing group, sharing her stories and receiving feedback. The thrill of creating new worlds and characters reignited a passion she had thought long extinguished. As she poured herself into her writing, Jane found a new rhythm in her life. Her job, while still demanding, felt less consuming. She began to draw boundaries, carving out time for her newfound passion without feeling guilty. But amidst the joy of writing and spending time with Thomas, the shadow of her corporate job loomed larger. The office politics, the incessant demands of her boss, and the pressure to perform weighed heavily on her mind. Each day at McKinley Enterprises became a reminder of the choices she needed to make. One Thursday morning, as Jane prepared for work, she received an unexpected call from Mr. Morgan. "Jane, I need to see you in my office," he said, his tone serious. A knot tightened in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever news awaited her. When she entered his office, the air felt charged with tension. Mr. Morgan was seated behind his large mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. "I've been reviewing your recent performance," he began, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And while you've been a valuable asset to this team, I've noticed a shift in your focus lately." Jane's heart raced. Was he going to reprimand her for spending more time writing? "I've been trying to manage my time." That evening, as Jane and Thomas strolled through a nearby park, the sun setting in a blaze of colors, she felt the weight of her decision bearing down on her. "Thomas," she began hesitantly, "I received an offer to publish my articles. It's everything I've ever wanted, but it also means leaving my job." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "That's amazing news, Jane. But I understand that's a big decision. What are you thinking?" "I love writing, but I've put so much time and energy into my career. It feels like I'd be throwing everything away if I leave. Or you could be embracing a new beginning," he said gently. "It's a chance to pursue your passion, to take a risk that could lead to something incredible." Jane looked out over the lake, where the water reflected the vibrant colors of the sunset. "What if I fail?" she whispered, vulnerability creeping into her voice. "Failure is just a stepping stone to success," he replied firmly. "You've already achieved so much. Remember how far you've come since that day in the street. You saved a life, and now you're on the path to saving your own dreams." His words resonated deep within her. "You're right," she said, feeling a surge of determination. "I can't let fear hold me back any longer." That night, as she lay in bed, Jane made her decision. She would take the leap into the unknown, embracing the adventure that awaited her. It was time to follow her heart, to become the author she had always dreamed of being. The next morning, she composed an email to Mr. Morgan, tendering her resignation. With each word she typed, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. When she finally hit send, a sense of relief washed over her, freeing her from the weight of indecision. Weeks later, after saying her goodbyes to her colleagues and wrapping up her projects, Jane found herself at the start of a new journey. With the release of her book approaching, she felt a sense of exhilaration and fear. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive. As she and Thomas celebrated her book launch together, surrounded by friends and fellow writers, Jane knew she had made the right choice. The ripple effect of her decision had transformed her life in ways she never imagined possible, guiding her toward a path filled with passion, adventure, and hope. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the warmth of friendship, Jane realized that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is to take a step toward the unknown, embracing the journey with open arms. The turning point. The launch party for Jane's book, Echoes of Ambition, was a whirlwind of excitement. Held in a vibrant local bookstore nestled in the heart of Chicago, the event drew a diverse crowd. Friends, family, fellow writers, and even a few curious strangers who had stumbled upon the celebration. Jane stood near the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest as she observed the throngs of people milling about. She felt a mix of pride and anxiety wash over her. This moment represented not just the culmination of her writing journey, but also a bold departure from the life she had once known. As guests flipped through the pages of her book, Sharing laughter and commentary, Jane felt a rush of gratitude. She had poured her heart into this work, chronicling her experiences, insights, and the lessons she had learned in the corporate world. The stories flowed with authenticity and vulnerability, striking chords with readers who craved real connections amidst the facades often presented in professional life. Jane. A familiar voice called, breaking her from her reverie. She turned to see Thomas weaving his way through the crowd, a radiant smile lighting up his face. "You did it. This is amazing." He swept her into an embrace, and Jane felt a warm rush of comfort. "Thanks, Thomas. I can't believe it's finally happening," she replied, beaming as she stepped back to take in the sight of him. He looked dapper in a crisp blue shirt and jeans, exuding an effortless charm that always made her heart skip a beat. "I'm so proud of you. Your journey has inspired me in ways I can't even explain," he said, his eyes sincere. As the evening progressed, Jane found herself surrounded by enthusiastic readers eager to discuss her book. They asked about her writing process, the inspiration behind her stories, and her plans for the future. With every compliment and question, Jane felt more confident and at home in her new role as an author. Amid the crowd, she spotted a group of aspiring writers, their eyes wide with admiration. They approached her hesitantly, as if they couldn't believe they were standing in front of the author they admired. "Your book really spoke to me," one young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been struggling to find my voice, and your journey reminded me that it's okay to take risks." Jane's heart swelled with joy. "Thank you. I truly believe that each of you has a story worth telling. Don't be afraid to pursue your passion," she encouraged, recalling her own fears and doubts from months prior. As she engaged with her readers, Jane noticed Thomas standing a few feet away, watching her with pride. His presence grounded her amid the chaos of the event, and she felt a rush of appreciation for the support he had given her throughout her journey. After a few hours, the bookstore began to quiet down as the last of the guests filtered out. Jane and Thomas remained, tidying up the remnants of the celebration, her heart brimming with gratitude. "You know, you should really take this opportunity to promote your book further," Thomas suggested, tossing a crumpled napkin into a nearby trash can. "Have you thought about doing book readings or signing events at local libraries or cafes?" Jane nodded thoughtfully. "I have, but I didn't think I'd be ready for that yet. What if no one shows up? Who cares if they do or don't? You're sharing your story, and that's what matters. Besides, it'll be a chance to connect with more readers," he replied, his enthusiasm infectious. That night, as Jane lay in bed, she couldn't shake the excitement that buzzed in her veins. Thomas's words echoed in her mind, urging her to embrace her newfound identity as a writer fully. The following weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. Jane organized her first book reading at a local coffee shop, inviting friends, family, and anyone else who would listen. She chose to read an excerpt that highlighted the pivotal moment when she had saved Thomas, how it had reshaped her outlook on life, and inspired her to pursue her passions. On the day of the reading, she arrived early to set up. The cozy cafe was adorned with twinkling fairy lights, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. As she arranged her notes on a small table in the corner, she felt a rush of nerves. "Just breathe, Jane," she muttered to herself, recalling the countless times she had faced fear head-on. "You've got this." As the clock struck 6, the cafe began to fill with patrons eager to listen. Friends and familiar faces greeted her with warm smiles, while strangers settled in with their drinks, curiosity written on their faces. "Thank you all for coming," Jane said, her voice steady yet tinged with excitement. "I'm thrilled to share my journey with you through my book." She began reading, her words flowing effortlessly, as she recounted the moment that had changed her life forever. With each passage, she felt the weight of her doubts lifting, replaced by an overwhelming sense of connection with her audience. When she finished, applause erupted in the cafe, filling her with warmth and gratitude. Jane looked out at the sea of faces, some visibly moved by her story. One man approached her, his eyes shining. "Your story reminded me of my own struggles. I've been contemplating a career change for years, and hearing your journey gave me the push I needed to finally take that leap." Jane smiled, feeling a rush of fulfillment. This was the essence of why she had written her book, to inspire others to embrace their own stories, no matter how daunting the journey seemed. After the reading, she engaged with guests, signing copies of her book and listening to their stories. Each interaction fueled her passion, igniting her belief that sharing one's experiences could spark change. As the evening wound down, Jane felt a profound sense of purpose. She had taken her fears and turned them into fuel, not just for her own growth, but for others as well. In the following weeks, Jane hosted more readings and began to receive invitations for panels and workshops. She thrived in these environments, sharing her insights and encouraging others to find their voices. As her author platform grew, so did her relationship with Thomas. They spent evenings discussing their goals, dreams, and the adventures they hoped to embark upon. With every shared story, their bond deepened, and Jane felt a sense of companionship that transcended friendship. One weekend, they decided to escape the city and hike the nearby trails. It was a crisp autumn day, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. As they ascended the trails, Jane felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins, the beauty of nature revitalizing her spirit. "See, this is what life is all about," Thomas said, grinning as he stopped to take a photo of a stunning vista. "Getting out, experiencing the world. I can't believe I almost let my fears hold me back," Jane admitted, taking in the breathtaking view. "I'm so grateful you pushed me to explore my passions." They reached a summit overlooking a vast expanse of colorful foliage. Jane paused, breathing in the fresh air. "This view is incredible. Thank you for encouraging me to do this," she said, her heart full. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Thomas replied, his eyes sparkling. "Life is about sharing experiences with people who inspire us." As they stood together, soaking in the beauty of the moment, Jane felt a shift within her. She had finally learned to embrace the unpredictable nature of life. It wasn't just about the safety of a corporate job anymore. It was about pursuing passions that ignited her spirit and made her feel truly alive. That evening, as they returned to the city, Jane reflected on how far she had come. The path she had chosen had been paved with uncertainty, but each step had led her closer to her true self. Yet, the reality of her transition into the literary world wasn't without its challenges. As Jane's success grew, so did her responsibilities. She was faced with the daunting task of maintaining her momentum, while ensuring that she didn't lose the spark that had ignited her journey in the first place. One afternoon, as she was brainstorming ideas for her next book, Jane received an unexpected phone call. It was Mr. Morgan, her former boss, asking if they could meet for coffee. Feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity, Jane agreed. She arrived at the cafe, her heart racing as she spotted him at a table, dressed sharply in his usual tailored suit. "Jane, it's good to see you," he said, extending a hand as she approached. "Good to see you too, Mr. Morgan," she replied, slipping into a seat across from him. After exchanging pleasantries, Jane sensed a shift in the atmosphere. "I've been following your journey since you left McKinley," he said, his tone serious. "I have to admit, I was surprised to see you thriving as an author." Jane smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. "Thank you. It's been a challenging but rewarding experience." Mr. Morgan leaned in, his expression earnest. "I wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. I've been working on a project aimed at corporate well-being and employee fulfillment. I think your perspective as an author who has successfully navigated that world could be invaluable." Jane's heart raced at the prospect. "You want to collaborate on a book?" "Precisely. I believe your insights could help others struggling in the corporate environment to find balance and happiness in their careers," he explained. Jane sat in stunned silence. The offer was unexpected, but it also resonated deeply with her desire to use her experiences to help others. "I'd love to hear more about your vision," she replied, feeling a sense of excitement bubbling within her. As they discussed the details, Jane felt the walls between her past and present begin to blur. This opportunity wasn't just a chance to reconnect with her former boss. It was a bridge between her old life and her new one, a chance to merge her experiences into something meaningful. By the time they finished their meeting, Jane felt invigorated. The collaboration could lead to even more significant changes, not just in her career, but in the lives of those who would read the book. With her mind racing with possibilities, she returned home that evening, excited to dive into this new project. The unexpected nature of her life had turned a corner once again, proving that sometimes the most significant opportunities arise from the most surprising encounters. As she settled in to brainstorm ideas for the book, Jane couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. The journey had been filled with challenges, uncertainty, and moments of self-discovery. But now she was forging ahead, ready to embrace whatever came next with an open heart and an adventurous spirit. Embracing new horizons. The collaboration with Mr. Morgan took off faster than Jane could have imagined. After their initial meeting, they spent countless hours discussing the book's theme and structure. They envisioned a guide that combined personal anecdotes, research, and practical advice for employees seeking fulfillment in their careers. As they worked together, Jane found herself rediscovering her corporate roots while simultaneously navigating her identity as a writer. Mr. Morgan brought a wealth of experience to the table, but Jane's fresh perspective breathed new life into their discussions. Let's focus on the balance between ambition and personal well-being, Jane suggested one afternoon as they met in the same cafe where they first discussed their collaboration. So many people lose themselves in their careers, forgetting to nurture their passions outside of work. Mr. Morgan nodded, his brow furrowing in thought. You're absolutely right. We need to highlight the importance of pursuing interests beyond the workplace. It can lead to greater job satisfaction and overall happiness. With each brainstorming session, Jane felt her excitement building. She was crafting a project that resonated with her experiences, while giving her an opportunity to bridge the gap between her old life and her new one. As they dove deeper into writing, Jane's creativity surged. She incorporated stories from her time at McKinley Enterprises, sharing the lessons she learned about ambition, resilience, and the significance of forging genuine connections. Their work sessions often stretched late into the evening, fueled by coffee and a shared passion for the project. Jane appreciated Mr. Morgan's insightful feedback and guidance, which pushed her to refine her writing and explore new angles. Your ability to weave narrative with practical advice is a unique strength, he remarked one day. You have the power to inspire others to find their paths. Those words struck a chord within Jane, reaffirming her belief in her newfound identity as a writer. She no longer felt confined to the corporate world. She was crafting her destiny, one word at a time. As the months passed, they completed the first draft of their book, tentatively titled Finding Fulfillment, Balancing Ambition and Well-Being in the Workplace. The process had not only been creatively stimulating, but had also strengthened their professional bond. Jane and Mr. Morgan would often share personal stories about their journeys, delving into their hopes and fears. Jane learned more about Mr. Morgan's motivations for wanting to write this book. He revealed how he had experienced burnout in his career, realizing the importance of well-being and work-life balance only after a significant personal crisis. I want this book to be a tool for others to avoid the same pitfalls, he confessed one afternoon as they sat surrounded by pages of their draft. It's about creating a healthier corporate culture that nurtures people, not just profits. Jane admired his commitment to making a difference in the corporate landscape. It's incredible that you're using your experiences to drive change, she said. That's something I'm deeply passionate about too. With each passing day, Jane felt a growing sense of purpose. The more she wrote, the more she realized the impact her words could have. She was creating a platform for others to reflect on their lives, encouraging them to take charge of their happiness. Once the draft was complete, they turned their attention to the editing process. They spent hours meticulously combing through the text, refining their message, ensuring that it resonated with their intended audience. During one editing session, Jane noticed how much they had grown as collaborators. "Remember when we started this project?" she said with a laugh. "We barely knew how to mesh our ideas." Mr. Morgan chuckled, his eyes sparkling with shared memories. "I think we've come a long way since then. Your insights have added depth to the book." The editing phase was intense but invigorating. They pushed each other to enhance their writing, and Jane often found herself challenging her limits. The experience was rewarding, as it forced her to confront her fears about her writing and to believe in her voice. Amid their busy schedule, Jane also maintained her other writing endeavors, penning articles for various publications and engaging with her readers online. She loved the interactions, finding that her readers' feedback and encouragement fueled her motivation to keep writing. One day, as she was responding to comments on her latest article about work-life balance, Jane received a message that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a reader who shared how her writing had inspired her to pursue a career in counseling, helping others navigate their own challenges. "Your words have changed my life, Jane," the message read. "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to follow my dreams." Tears welled in Jane's eyes as she read the message. This was precisely why she had embarked on this journey, to touch lives, to inspire others to take the leap toward their passions. As the book's release date drew closer, Jane and Mr. Morgan began planning their launch event. They envisioned a celebration that would not only highlight their work, but also foster a community discussion on the importance of well-being in the workplace. "We should invite local businesses and organizations," Mr. Morgan suggested during one of their meetings. "We could create a platform for dialogue, bringing together leaders who want to make a difference." Jane's eyes lit up at the idea. "That's brilliant. We can facilitate workshops and discussions, encouraging people to share their experiences and learn from one another." With a shared vision, they dove into planning the launch event. They secured a venue, organized panels with industry experts, and invited local media to cover the occasion. The excitement was palpable, and Jane felt the momentum building as the event date approached. In the weeks leading up to the launch, Jane threw herself into her writing while managing the logistics for the event. Despite the busy schedule, she relished the thrill of creativity and collaboration. But amid the flurry of activity, Jane also faced moments of doubt. Questions began to creep into her mind. What if the book didn't resonate with readers? What if no one showed up for the launch event? During one particularly challenging week, Jane sat down with Thomas, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm scared, Thomas. What if I'm not good enough? What if this book flops?" He took her hand gently, his expression earnest. "Jane, you've come so far already. You've inspired so many people with your words. Remember why you started this journey in the first place." "You're right," she sighed, her heart still heavy with uncertainty. "I can't let fear hold me back." With Thomas's support, Jane refocused her energy on the positive impact her book could have. She poured her heart into the final preparations, creating promotional material and practicing her speeches. Finally, the day of the launch arrived. The venue buzzed with energy as attendees began to trickle in. Jane stood at the entrance, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling within her. As the event kicked off, she welcomed the audience with a heartfelt speech about the significance of pursuing one's passion and the importance of well-being in the workplace. "Today, we're not just launching a book, we're igniting a movement," she declared, her voice steady. "We're here to inspire each other to embrace our journeys, to share our stories, and to create positive change in our lives and workplaces." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jane felt a surge of empowerment. The launch event included panel discussions, workshops, and opportunities for networking, all aimed at fostering dialogue about work-life balance. As the day unfolded, Jane reveled in the connection she witnessed among attendees. People shared their stories, discussing their challenges and triumphs, and ideas flowed freely. At the end of the day, as Jane and Mr. Morgan stood together, surrounded by smiles and laughter, she felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. They had created something beautiful, a space where people could share, connect, and inspire each other. "This is just the beginning, Jane," Mr. Morgan said, clapping her on the back. "I can't wait to see where this journey takes us next." In that moment, Jane realized that she had not only reclaimed her passion for writing, but had also found her purpose. She was weaving together her experiences and stories to create a tapestry of inspiration for others, lighting the way for those navigating their own journeys. With her heart full and her spirit soaring, Jane embraced the future with excitement. The path ahead was filled with unknowns, but she felt ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. It was a new dawn, and she was eager to explore the horizon. The power of connection. The days following the launch event were a whirlwind of activity. Jane and Mr. Morgan received an outpouring of positive feedback about finding fulfillment. Reviews flooded in from readers who were inspired by their message, and their book quickly gained traction within local and online communities. Energized by the reception, Jane found herself immersed in a new world of opportunities. Invitations to speak at conferences and workshops began pouring in, each one a chance to share their vision of a balanced life. She felt a sense of validation that she had never experienced in her corporate job. "Look at this," she exclaimed one afternoon as she shared a recent email with Thomas. "We've been invited to speak at the Chicago Work-Life Balance Summit." Thomas beamed with pride, wrapping his arms around her in a celebratory hug. "You deserve it, Jane. Your words are making a difference." As the summit approached, Jane spent hours preparing her speech. She wanted to convey not just the essence of the book, but also the importance of community and support in the journey to fulfillment. "People need to hear about the power of connection," she told Thomas one evening while pacing their living room. "It's not just about finding balance for ourselves, but also about supporting one another in that quest." With Thomas's encouragement, Jane crafted her presentation to include personal stories, both her struggles and triumphs, alongside the core messages from their book. She wanted her audience to feel seen and understood, to know that they were not alone in their pursuits. On the day of the summit, the energy in the auditorium was electric. Attendees buzzed with anticipation as Jane took the stage. The spotlight warmed her skin, and she could feel her heart racing as she scanned the crowd. "Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today," Jane began, her voice steady despite the nerves. "I want to talk about something that has changed my life, the importance of community in achieving fulfillment." As she spoke, she recounted her journey, the burnout, the moment she chose to save a stranger, and how that pivotal experience led her to reconnect with her passion for writing. Each story resonated with the audience, sparking nods of understanding and murmurs of agreement. "I realized that the connections we form with others can profoundly impact our well-being," she continued. "When we support one another, we create a foundation that allows us to thrive, both personally and professionally." The audience was captivated. Jane felt their energy shift as she shared anecdotes of friends and colleagues who had uplifted her during difficult times, reinforcing the idea that we all need support. As her speech came to a close, she looked out at the faces in the crowd, each one a reflection of someone navigating their own path. "We all have the power to foster change in our environments, whether it's in our workplaces, communities, or even our homes. Let's commit to supporting one another, to creating spaces where everyone can pursue their passions." The applause that followed was deafening. Jane stepped off the stage, her heart soaring. She had connected with the audience in a way she had never anticipated, and the experience solidified her belief in the power of shared stories. After the summit, Jane found herself inundated with requests for one-on-one conversations. Attendees approached her, eager to share their stories, their struggles, and their dreams. "Your message inspired me to take the leap and start my own business," one woman said, her eyes glistening with determination. "Thank you for showing me it's possible." As Jane listened to each story, she realized that her writing had sparked something deeper within people. They were not just looking for advice. They were seeking connection and affirmation. In the weeks that followed, Jane organized informal meetups for those who reached out after the summit. She wanted to create a community where people could come together, share their journeys, and uplift one another. The first meetup was held at a cozy coffee shop in their neighborhood. Jane arrived early, her heart pounding with anticipation. She set up a few tables, placing her book and promotional materials on display. When the attendees began to arrive, she felt an overwhelming sense of joy. They were a diverse group, individuals from various backgrounds and professions, all united by their desire for fulfillment. As they settled in, Jane introduced herself and shared her story, encouraging each person to share their own experiences. The room filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt conversations. One man spoke of his struggles with burnout after years in a high-pressure corporate job, while a woman shared how she had left her stable career to pursue her passion for painting. Each story echoed the themes of resilience and courage, and Jane felt a warm sense of belonging among them. As the evening progressed, Jane realized that these connections were blossoming into something beautiful. People exchanged contact information, formed plans to collaborate, and promised to support one another in their pursuits. "This is what I hoped for," Jane thought as she looked around the room, her heart swelling with pride. "This is the community we need." Over the next few months, Jane continued to host meetups, gradually expanding to workshops where participants could engage in discussions about finding fulfillment and creating supportive networks. She even partnered with local businesses to host events that promoted mental health and well-being. During one workshop, Jane facilitated a discussion about the importance of setting boundaries in the workplace. "It's essential to communicate our needs clearly," she emphasized. "We have to advocate for ourselves and encourage others to do the same." The participants nodded in agreement, and the conversations flowed effortlessly. Jane felt invigorated by the collective energy of the group, and the experience fueled her creativity. Encouraged by the positive response, Jane decided to write a follow-up book that would include stories from the community she had nurtured. She wanted to highlight the power of connection and showcase how people were embracing their passions and transforming their lives. As she delved into writing, Jane reached out to several participants, inviting them to contribute their stories. Their responses were enthusiastic, each one eager to share how the community had impacted their lives. The process of weaving their narratives into her writing was cathartic. It reminded her that she wasn't alone in her journey and that the power of shared experiences could create ripples of change. However, amid the excitement, Jane faced moments of self-doubt. Would readers connect with these stories? Would her follow-up book resonate as much as the first? One evening, feeling particularly vulnerable, she confided in Thomas. "What if this book doesn't meet expectations? What if it doesn't inspire anyone?" He took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. "Jane, the impact you've already made is immeasurable. You're sharing stories that matter. Just be true to yourself, and the rest will follow." His reassurance grounded her, and Jane channeled her fears into her writing, pouring her heart into every word. As the manuscript neared completion, Jane felt a renewed sense of purpose. She began envisioning the next steps, finding a publisher, organizing a launch event, and continuing to build the community she had nurtured. When she finally submitted the manuscript to a publisher, Jane experienced a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The waiting period felt endless, and she often found herself lost in thoughts of what the future would hold. After several weeks, she received an email that sent her heart racing. The publisher wanted to move forward with her book. They loved the idea of showcasing real stories from the community and believed it had the potential to inspire many more people. The news brought a wave of relief and joy, and Jane celebrated with Thomas and her community. Together, they envisioned how the launch event could not only celebrate the book, but also continue fostering connections among attendees. As the launch date approached, Jane's excitement grew. She decided to incorporate a community panel into the event, inviting some of the contributors to share their stories live. It felt like the perfect way to honor their journeys and create an interactive experience for attendees. On the day of the launch, the venue buzzed with anticipation once again. Jane's heart raced as she set up the space, arranging seating for the panel and preparing for her speech. When the event began, Jane stood before a packed audience, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate not just this book, but the community we've built together," she began, her voice unwavering. As she introduced the panelists, Jane felt a sense of pride as each contributor shared their story. The room was filled with laughter, tears, and shared experiences, creating an atmosphere of warmth and connection. After the panel, Jane took the stage once more to share her own journey, emphasizing the importance of nurturing connections. "Let's continue to support one another," she urged. "Let's create a culture where we uplift each other as we pursue our passions." As the audience erupted in applause, Jane realized the impact of her journey had come full circle. She had transformed her life from a place of uncertainty and discontent into one filled with purpose and connection. After the event, people lingered to network and share their own stories. Jane felt a sense of fulfillment as she watched her vision come to life, witnessing the bonds forming among attendees. In the following months, Jane continued to build on the momentum of her books and community gatherings. She launched a website dedicated to sharing stories of fulfillment, providing a platform for others to connect, inspire, and be inspired. The community flourished, and Jane felt a sense of pride in the ripple effect they were creating. She realized that the journey was never truly over. It was an ever-evolving tapestry of experiences and connections. As Jane reflected on her journey, she knew that she had discovered her true calling, not just as a writer, but as a catalyst for change. She had learned the power of sharing stories and how they could resonate deeply with others, igniting inspiration and hope. Through her writing, she had not only found her voice, but also a community that lifted each other toward greater fulfillment. And with each new story, each connection made, she felt the pulse of possibility beating stronger than ever. Jane understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she embraced them as opportunities for growth. She was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that she was never alone on her journey. Together with her community, she was ready to explore new horizons, always seeking the light of fulfillment in the beautiful, intricate tapestry of life.